Welcome to the 36th episode of A Change is a Chance. My name is Ryan Lowe, and my goal is to educate listeners, especially the youth, on some of the most pressing and polarizing issues in this world by interviewing different experts who can lead us into the charge for change. Something I believe deeply, and the reason that I started this podcast, and something you have heard from past guests, is the importance of educating youth on some of the toughest issues of our time. So they understand the truth behind the cause, understand the impact, hear and see the victims, understand the intricacies of possible solutions, and hopefully feel motivated to make change for themselves. The key to raising and accepting children who are willing to advocate for social justice is to normalize these topics at an early age. And one path that we can take to achieve this is children's literature. So, despite what it seems, a nonfiction research book is not the only way to educate someone. A fantasy novel can do that too. And that is what Miss Maggie Tokuda-Hall, author of fantasy novels The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea, The Siren, The Song of the Spy, and graphic novels Squad, and the newly released The Worst Ronin, has been doing so for more than 8 years. Maggie is a children's author who has won multiple awards for novels and picture books alike, and has continued to have a dedication to social justice. Many see this label of children's book and assume they have no deeper meaning, so by writing about these diverse topics from rape culture and mental health to heteronormativity and book bans, Maggie is rewriting the power and impact of a kid's book. And that power and impact are far reaching. So, how are you doing today, Maggie?
I'm well. Thank you for having me, Ryan. And I feel like it's worth saying that there's like an entire robust industry of people who are doing this kind of work. It's not like I'm a lone soldier, like creating meaning through children's books. It's a very mature industry with a lot of really talented and passionate people in it.
Yeah, yeah, I should have said that. This
No, no worries.
So I had the chance to meet you at the author event you held at Head Royce, my school, where you talked
Mhm.
about your books, the power within them, and just how important literature can be to just a person. So let's start with a question about that. How can authors of children's books inspire their readers to make change, or at least how about be more comfortable with who they are?
Oh gosh. I mean, I feel like every time we sit down and reread a story that isn't our own, we have the opportunity to put ourselves into experiences that we haven't had, or to see our own experiences reflected back in a way that we had not thought about them or that had never been acknowledged before. And in so doing, we empower kids to think about themselves as characters in a story, first of all, but also to encourage the development of empathy, which is something that we learn through our childhood. It's not something that we're necessarily born with. And so it's just every time you read a story, you have that invitation, you have that opportunity to think, either as the character as a window or a door to your own soul, right? Like it's either a door into an experience that you've never had or a mirror to something that you have experienced and you feel like a deeper sense of solidarity or understanding or whatever it may be. And those are essential ingredients to personal liberation, and the personal always comes before the political. And so when we are personally liberated, we are able to shift our focus onto the collective a lot more successfully for how we can liberate our friends and our loved ones as well.
Yeah, and I know for me, I mean, okay, I used to be a huge avid reader, but then I was introduced to the word annotations. So, yeah, but I would always just think in a story, oh, that character does that. I do that too. And so I can totally see how important that can be to the writing process.
Totally.
So, as I talked about earlier, you have integrated a lot of social issues into your book. So, when
Mhm.
you're starting a new book, what is the process or your way of thinking when you just decide how you want to integrate something like that?
I mean, I very rarely am sitting down and just have a social justice goal in mind. I'm usually thinking about the characters and how they can best propel a plot that is both compelling and emotionally resonant and has enough meat to be an entire story. Um, with the exception, I suppose, of I wrote a picture book called Love in the Library, which is the true story of how my maternal grandparents met in a Japanese American incarceration camp. And that one I sat down. It is unusual because I don't usually write nonfiction. It's not typical of my work, but that one had a very specific goal, which was to talk about the incredible cruelty of racist state-sanctioned violence, but also the unbelievable resilience of the people that those policies tend to target. And so, sometimes it's something like that where I sit down and I'm like, I am trying to say this specific thing, and that's my goal today. But often I am just thinking about the things in my own life or the people in my own life and thinking about the stories I wish I could tell about them or to them or that I wish we had had available to us. And that's sort of where I get going with the characters. And for me, it always starts with characters and then I figure out sort of the emotional tenor of the ending I'm trying to shoot toward, and then everything else falls into place kind of accordingly and as the story demands. And often that will end up begging questions that are related to the question of social justice because it is impossible to think about our place in the world without thinking about those questions and without asking why do some people have privilege and some people don't. But it's rarely that I sit down and I'm like, today I'm going to solve racism.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I take it that what you just explained was just your writing process.
Hmm.
I love that, how your writing process is your social justice process because you don't have to just have a social justice process. That makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
So, in your book, The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea, the
Hmm.
main cast of characters and their backstories are rather unique, or at least against a lot of the conventional story ideas. We have Flora, who takes on the mantle of a boy named Florian to survive and be accepted by these pirates, and
Hmm.
Evelyn, the girl forced into marriage. And they fall in love, presenting a queer love story that breaks many other traditional gender roles. So, how are you inspired to create this?
Yeah, I mean, that one has such a specific point of inspiration. I was a longtime children's bookseller, and when I made friends with a very precocious and voracious young reader named Claire. And in eventually her parents hired me to be her creative writing tutor. And so I got to know her extremely well, and she's still a very important person in my life. And in the course of the time when I was tutoring her from the time she was about 10 years old until she graduated high school, um, I could tell that she was queer and didn't have the language for it when she was like 12 or 13 years old. And I sat down and I wrote The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea very much for her. I wanted her to have a queer love story that did all the things that all of her favorite fantasy novels did, you know, kissing, murder, rules, magic, battles, everything. But offered her a queer love story at its heart because that's what she deserved as a reader. And it wasn't sort of like a huge, larger social justice goal so much as it was a letter of incredible affection, admiration, and love for a particular kid who happened to be queer and happened to love this kind of work. But in writing it and in promoting it, it became much more about the social justice aspect of it because people are so resistant to queer stories. And in fact, The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea is one of my most banned books because of the queerness at the heart of it. And so I feel like in the way that many historically marginalized people and identities, what ends up happening is that we're not actually interested in having the social justice fight. The social justice fight comes to us because people are so threatened by our very existence, by our audacity to tell our own stories without trying to shave down their sharp edges to heteronormativity or white sensitivity. And so, it's been a real double-sided sword and like of pleasure and pride and also real disappointment and sadness for the reception for that book.
I I mean, what you're saying about, your motivation for writing that book, on one hand, people can see a superficial lens of like entertainment. On another,
Mm-hmm.
what I came into this conversation with, it's like social justice. But I think
Mm-hmm.
you're right, the most important thing is really writing for someone, having that personal connection. And I think that's what makes a lot of books special.
Yeah, I agree.
So I know you had discussed at my school that one of your other books, Squad, was more personal to you as
Hmm.
setting was inspired by Piedmont High, right? You
Yes,
went to
Piedmont High
Piedmont High,
School.
right? Yeah. And I remember that this book was about rape culture and feminism.
Hmm.
Was your youth experience at least like a factor in making this book? And do you believe that Squad symbolizes the truth of many girls' experience today and how?
I mean, yes. I joke that Squad is my memoir, but with werewolves, although I promise I've never murdered anyone. Um, I grew up in Piedmont, and some of the things I saw there made me so angry, and some of the things that I experienced hurt me so deeply because there's such a pervasive rape culture there. And I had tried for a really long time, basically as soon as I started writing, which was in high school, to talk about it. And I could never quite communicate exactly what it felt like to grow up that way and to be a girl that way and to like not to put too fine a point on it, but I was like a pretty girl. And so I received male attention whether I wanted it or not. And the way that it came was often really hurtful and like really traumatic. And so Squad is very much about my own lived experience and the fact that begs questions about feminism and rape culture to me is again almost incidental. It is just the truth of my story has those things in it because we exist in a world with power structures, and it was impossible for me to talk about my own high school experience without talking about those power structures. But making it about werewolves allowed me to have fun with it in a way that it was what was missing in all the other times I tried to tell it. And I think for me anyway, it has been a real journey for understanding the power of speaking to my own truth while still allowing myself to take joy in it. And that's sort of like where the werewolves come from is like, yes, there's like some very serious themes, I guess you could call them, that are running through this story, but they are incidental to this otherwise kind of like bloody, cathartic, funny, absurd story that feels a lot closer to how I felt in high school and how I wished I'd been talked to. Because it's really, again, it's like a love letter to a specific kid. And it was to me in high school where I wanted someone to tell me it's okay to be angry and the things you're experiencing aren't fair. You're right to be mad. And that's really all that book is meant to do is to look teenagers in the eye and tell them, yeah, it's okay to be mad. That's it. And again, it gets banned a lot. And not for the violence. I feel like if it got banned for the violence, I would be like, touche, we can talk about this. This is a very real concern. I'm happy to discuss it with you, but it gets banned for being queer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's really great. I mean, I see a common theme in this conversation just being true to yourself. In in this current world where everything is usually dominated by this idea of like working till you die and this
Yes.
level of stress, how have your books been influenced by like fighting against that with mental health topics? Sorry, this is not going well. How do you
No,
incorporate
I think I
topics?
understand the question where it's like we live in a capitalist environment that is grinding us down. Do I feel like my own work is in any way a resistance to that?
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking? Yeah, I think that's such an insightful question. And I feel like you were really listening to what I had to say when I came and spoke at your school. Because the head race is full of a lot of kids with a lot of expectation on them and a lot of high achievers. And this is in no way to belittle that. And you guys have accomplished so much and you should be proud of yourselves. I also think that we put so much pressure on teenagers about college and about their lives and about how they will become productive capitalist citizens that is really unhealthy for your long-term mental health. And it is something that I have spent my entire adult life trying to unlearn. And so I would say it has only been in the more recent work in my career that I have learned to start trying to shed that particular set of shackles. And I would say Squad was the first book where I started to, where I was really like, hey, I am an artist, I get to do whatever I want. Why would I make this serious and crushing when I could make it fun and absurd and bloody because that's what I like and that's what brings me pleasure? And so my most recent book, The Worst Ronin, is probably the most mature expression of that in my own work that I have so far. I explicitly sat down, wrote that book, and told myself, I can do whatever I want. And I do not care if it is good for my brand, if it's going to sell well, if this in any way fits into a niche market. I am just doing what feels good to me, the kinds of stories I like to read. And when it sold, I was like, that's it. That's permission. Like, you get to do that. Because I mean, what is the point of being an artist if you are not allowing yourself to have fun and to take pleasure in your work and to do it because you feel compelled to, not because you're worried about making ends meet? Although I should say, with all of this, I exercise enormous privilege, which is that I come from generational wealth. And so, like many millennials, the down payment on my house was in part subsidized by my parents. Like they helped us pay for our first house. And I'm also in love with somebody whose skill set in life is much more lucratively rewarded. And so I do have freedom that isn't available to everybody. And so I just always, whenever I'm preaching my like, artists should be free, I just want to be clear that like there's a lot of caveats to that, and other people have to make different decisions, not because they are not good artists and not because they don't take the craft seriously, but because they have to. And it's not fair and it's not right. And in a perfect world, they would be able to exercise the same kind of freedom that I have been able to. But again, can't liberate our friends until we have liberated ourselves. So step one, free myself from capitalism. Step two, try to figure it out for all my friends and my community at large of artists.
Yeah. First of all, it's great that you mentioned that level of privilege because I know a lot of people could say the same thing as you and then not mention that.
Yeah.
And then also, you're right about just everything.
Oh, well, thank you. I'll go ahead and tell all of my friends and family that. They'll be so surprised.
Sorry, but what I was gonna say is what you're saying about how this idea of capitalism, of overproductiveness, is really just
Hmm.
ingrained in everyone's head. And it's really great that you found a way for yourself, at least, to break free from that. And
I hope so.
topic,
Yeah.
on that topic of the worst roading, I think the thing that most resonated with me over
Hmm.
your conversation back at Head Royce was how you explained that, and you just did too, that book does not have any major social implications because you don't have to do that. You're not obligated to focus on these issues as a lot of the world expects. So can you explain that more?
Yeah, I mean, specifically, I am not here to give you a civics lesson in ancient Japanese politics or society. There's
Yeah.
this real demand from people of color when we write books that it needs to be like about our culture and to like really teach people who are outside of our culture about what it means to be inside. And I feel like that is very much a white gaze issue where it's like, what you want is for me to give you interesting things to say at the next dinner party you go to so that you feel like a more worldly and interesting person. And I'm not here to do that for you. That's not my job in the world. I enjoy feudal Japan as a setting. I think it's exciting and fun. And I have my own Japanese heritage, of course, that like makes it extra compelling for me. And I wouldn't say Ronin is a book with no social justice issues in it. Like it does have a kind of like a larger question about what it means to be in the military, basically, and like what it means to ever kill on somebody else's order and what that means for us. And what does heroism mean when it's embedded within patriarchy and within this sort of militarized society. But it's again, it's goofy. Like it's silly. There's farts, there's monsters. I'm here to have a good time. I'm not here to teach you how to be a better person all the time. And I think particularly authors of marginalized identities, whether you're LGBTQ or you're a person of color, there's this real onus to create role models. And that book is very much a middle finger to that idea. I am not here to create role models. And I think that that is a very noxious way to handle marginalized identities and people in general, because we are all just humans, and forcing people to live a life of perfection is as much a prison as anything else. Even if you have the best intentions, even if it's because you want them to be good people, that's great. But most people aren't. And most of us are just trying to get through. And we have the people that we love, and we're trying our best. And that should be enough in a lot of ways. And I think that that judgment comes down particularly hard on people of marginalized identity because we have limited time at the microphone. And so there's this like, well, if you're going to be there, then you better do everything for the people. And it's like, what if I just wanted to tell a fun story because it's a good story and I want you to have fun? Because I think it's important for kids to have fun. I think that's a social justice issue too, of like we are basically grooming all of our children to be incredibly effective cogs, and we are forgetting about the essential joy of being an adolescent. I would like to give you books that are fun. It doesn't mean they don't have any depth. It doesn't mean that they don't have questions about things that are real. But not everything has to be a civics lesson. You have school for that. You have such limited time, free time to read when you're in high school. And so I feel like when I create stuff for high schoolers, I really try to keep in mind, like, you better hook their attention, first of all, but second of all, give them something that they're not getting at school.
I've never thought about it that way. I mean, I am in school, so everything
Yeah,
I'm told is you do this because it tells you this, and you do that because it does this for you. But
right.
you know, learning about I forgot the monster's name. I'm opening the book right now.
The Yamalba, yeah.
Yes, the child eater.
Yes.
That's also really interesting, just as much
Yeah.
as certain topics that I'll learn in like English class are.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't know how else to say it other than like reading is the pursuit of joy on some level. And whether you get your joy from parsing incredibly complicated sentences that tell you something deep about mankind, or in almost mathematical precision to some of the poetry that is created, it is still like art is meant to create a kind of deep and abiding pleasure. And I think that that is undervalued, particularly within capitalism, because we don't have time for pleasure. It's only so good as so far as it can sell things to people. That's pleasure's benefit in the way that we talk about things. And I think that there's a much deeper meaning and importance to joy and to pleasure, which is that we should be enjoying our lives.
Yeah, I mean, huh? You're making me rethink everything.
Listen, you should still try hard in school and like
So
do
yeah,
what your parents tell you to do. But like, if I can plant the seed of like life is for enjoying, well, I wouldn't regret that.
so finally, after delving through all of these issues from social justice to not social justice to enjoying life, of from all these things you've tackled in your books and just this conversation, can we discuss a problem that could destroy all of that? As a founding member of Authors Against Book Bans,
Mm,
what can you tell us about this issue and what can we do to fight against the censorship of literature? And I've heard you like
absolutely.
sprinkle little things in throughout this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think for all children's book creators right now, this is very front of mind because we have seen an exponential rise in book bans since the year 2020, which, not to sound like a tinfoil hat type of person, but 2020 was the summer where we had the George Floyd protests and we saw cross-racial lines, young people stepping forward and saying absolutely not. And we had their educations to thank for that in a large way and the books that they were reading. And I think there were adults who saw that and felt very afraid. And you know what? Frankly, they should. They should be afraid of you. You guys are really powerful and you are the future. And they are trying to tamp down what ability you will have to affect change by limiting the books that you will have access to, by limiting everybody's access to public institutions of learning, because that is ultimately what book bans are about. It's about creating financial sway and loss in these public institutions until they are gone. So, for example, in Idaho, we just saw a state bill pass where anyone can walk into any library, pick up any kid's book they find, and say, I find this offensive. And the library would have to pay a $250 fine per book per title, like that every time this happens. They basically created a book bounty. And as the librarians in Idaho are scrambling to figure out how they're going to deal with this, one library, and Donnelly has already made the choice that starting July 1st, they will be an adults only public library because that is the only way to financially weather this storm. And so all the children of Donnelly in Idaho have no place to access free books, which is a very upsetting classist issue where like it's horrifying and it's a terrible outcome. And so Authors Against Book Bans is a group of I think like 1,600 authors at this point. And we are seeking to organize ourselves in this and to be responsive in this moment because this is our work, this is our livelihoods. But more than that, this is what we believe in. We wrote books for kids because we believe kids are the future. We believe that they have the right to learn. We believe that they have the right to honesty and to literature and to joy and to pleasure and all these things that books can offer us, enrichment and wisdom. And it is really horrifying. And right now, I have to be really frank with you. This is a fight that we're losing. We're really behind in this fight. The far-right extremists who are behind the large organizing efforts to get books banned have like a 3-year head start on us at minimum. But I got involved because I genuinely believe this is a fight we can win. There are a lot of really big systemic issues that keep me up at night and that make me very fearful for the future. And I don't know how we win a lot of those fights. I don't know what happens. Or do we just become habituated to a new kind of awful, right? But in the case of book bannings, what we have seen is that when community members, and specifically when teenagers get involved, we have an incredibly high success rate. So things that teenagers can do, I mean, in the Bay Area, it's more limited because this isn't a huge problem in the Bay Area. Let's be real. Like the Oakland Unified School District isn't going to ban any books. The Oakland PL is not going to do that. Like we're very blessed. But for Californian teens, you should know that there's a bill coming onto the state floor this year that is like an anti-book banning bill. And that could be a really big deal to set the framework for our whole state of just making this an impossible gesture to be made. And teens who are 18 can vote, but if you're younger than that, you can still reach out to your state senators and say, hey, this is a huge priority for me. And here's why. Here's the books that have changed my life. Here's what reading means to me. And I think kids especially tend to underestimate the power of their voices. You guys have a lot of power, and politicians are not perfect, and they are not subject matter experts the way that we often wish they were, and particularly around kids' books, they are very ignorant. But kids do the best job of communicating why these books are important because they're for them. So you can do things like thank your local librarian. You should thank your high school librarian because they do an incredible job. The fact that I was at your school at all is a testament to the fact that you have people, adults, who are concerned enough with your education to ensure that you have diverse speakers coming to talk to you about things that may not be exactly tied into the curriculum. And you can write your state senators, you can write your representatives on like the national level as well. You have Congress people and senators that represent you. Like there's a lot that can be done. You can also do things like follow groups like PEN America, Every Library, the National Coalition Against Censorship on Instagram or on TikTok and some of these places because there are advocacy groups all over the country doing this kind of work. And it is just sort of about getting people to realize that we need to participate. This is a fight we can win so long as we participate. But the problem is, most of us are not participating right now. Most people don't agree with book bans. This is a winnable fight, and I think we should.
Not a lot of people hear about this fight, everywhere on the news. They'll see occasionally, like, what, Heartstopper gets banned in
Mm-hmm.
Higher South, and that's all they'll see. But I think it's really important to notice how more and more books exponentially are getting banned for all these different reasons because
Yeah.
all these like people who have these, certain views are just saying, I don't like this, get out. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I
I think
think,
we all need to get
you
involved.
know, they have figured out the most expeditious way to defund institutions of public learning and to insulate their own power. And they've done that by inflaming people's most easily inflamed prejudices. So, of course, it falls along predictable lines where books by Black authors and Indigenous authors and Palestinian authors and trans authors and gay authors are banned so much more than the rest of us. And it's pernicious and it's ugly, but it is beatable.
I mean, it's great you think that. We got this. We got this.
We do, as long as people participate, which is the problem for so many of these things, but especially this one.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Maggie. It was really inspiring listening to what you had to say back at school, and I'm glad I got to talk to you today. You have a really unique worldview that is just, on it, to me, it was mind-blowing. I've never heard half the things you've said, and a lot of the times, certain, people will come on stages and be like this, and the next person will say this too. But you have that perspective rather than a this. And that's really great. So thank you so much.
Well, I'm so glad. And it was such a pleasure to chat with you. You're a really thoughtful kid, and I can't wait to see what you do with all of your power.
Thank you so much. That's it for the 36th episode of A Change of the Chance. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next episode.